Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for today's webinar, Menopause, More Meaningful and Effective Support at Work. You join us as we just passed World Menopause Day, which was on the 18th of October. So no better time to host this webinar. It's great. Seems to be quite gloomy down south. By all accounts, I'm in Chester and see a little bit of blue sky out the window, so certainly can't complain this morning. So hopefully the weather improves down south quite soon and it's nice and relatively sunny where you are. My name is Andy Rigby. I'm one of the enablement leads here at Posturite. Our enablement team works with organisations all over the world, supporting people through neurodiversity and disability assessments, workplace adjustments, and access to work support. If anything we talk about today sparks a question, or if you'd like to find out more about what our enablement team does, do get in touch. You can email us at enablement@posturite.co.uk or directly to myself, Andy Rigby, at posturite.co.uk. It'd be great to hear from you. So to our webinar, we are very pleased to welcome Menopause Coach Emma Wee to the session. Morning, Emma. Emma brings a creative perspective from a design background to her coaching practice, tailoring her approach to each client's unique needs. With over 12 years experience and more than 6,500 coaching hours, she has supported individuals with neurodiverse conditions such as dyslexia, ADHD, autism, and dyspraxia, as well as those navigating fibromyalgia, anxiety, and depression, as well, of course, menopause. A passionate advocate for self-understanding and resilience, Emma helps clients see neurodiversity not as a flaw, but as a different and powerful way of working. She also works with women through peri and post-menopause, offering strategies and a space to be heard during times of change. So I'll pass across to Emma to discuss this morning's topic, menopause, more meaningful and effective support at work.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to switch across to my slide deck now. So today's session is going to be hopefully going to give you some accurate, most up-to-date research and information. The intention is not to try and make you go away and kind of be experts in any of this stuff. It's really about giving enough information so that you can go away, continue to have conversations, be able to feel as though you've got the right language to be a self-advocate or to be an advocate for others. So we're going to look at perimenopause and menopause within the scope of neurodiversity and how it's now kind of being seen as an acquired neurodiversity and where that then sits within the reasonable adjustment space. And I think that's important because actually fundamentally we want to keep women in the workplace and allow them to kind of function in the workplace in a comfortable and supported way. So that's why it's important to kind of give it that kind of relevance in terms of why it should be supported. So I'm going to look at neurodiversity, look at the kind of some of the conditions that kind of are comorbid and kind of might be more impacted by kind of perimenopause. I will look at the technicalities around perimenopause and kind of what the symptoms are. I will do a little bit about kind of education around kind of hormones and things like that. And then we will look at some kind of best practice and support in the workplace. As Anna said, there's space in the Q&A. Hopefully, as we go through, you will have some of those answers that you're kind of looking for. Yeah, hopefully this will kind of give you some information that is needed and validating of your experience. Okay, so neurodiversity is an umbrella term for a cluster of neurological conditions. So one of the things that I quite like to describe neurodiversity as is a bit like a telephone number. Okay, so your brain is the area code, and it's only going to be a certain combination of numbers that's going to lead you to a particular person on the other end of the line. Similarly, with neurodiversity, it's only going to be a combination of traits over a persistent period of time that's going to lead you to a neurotype or blend of neurotypes. I think what's really important about kind of acknowledging where people are in different times of their life is that, if a brain has the environment and the strategies it needs to support the way it needs to work in a particular environment, it'll thrive. When there's something that's tipping the balance, that's when the kind of the functional kind of strategies you might have in place may not work in the same way anymore. And that's why a lot of women going through perimenopause and menopause feel like they're suddenly kind of losing the plot because the things that they used to be able to do for a long time suddenly don't work in the same way. And that's why kind of the the idea of it being an acquired neurodiversity, something that has an impact on your processing in a very tangible way, day to day, for quite a period of time, is really important to acknowledge in terms of support, in terms of kind of like giving people the right tools that they need. It's also kind of useful to kind of note that in the last couple of years, perimenopause and menopause now counts underneath sort of the Disability Act, in terms of the Equality Act of 2010, and is classed as a disability, going under the kind of definition that a disability is an ongoing condition that impacts someone on a day-to-day basis for 12 months or more. That's not to say that we're disabling women or that women are disabled by perimenopause or menopause, but it's an important distinction in terms of getting the workplace to kind of acknowledge why it needs to be supported. I suppose the biggest thing is that a lot of women, and sort of we know that kind of women's kind of healthcare, and kind of in terms of kind of women being seen as kind of, you know, productive members of society post kind of producing babies, and is kind of something that they often feel as though they have to justify their position in the workplace. And I think this is where kind of the ableist stance can really kind of start kicking into gear. Ableism is the idea that someone is less than, and that the individual has to fix themselves in order to fit in with a pre-existing system. And actually, you know, being neurodiverse, having acquired neurodiversity, or kind of being neurodiverse to start with, does not mean you're broken. So going through perimenopause, menopause does not mean you're broken. You don't need fixing, you just need different tools. And I think it's really important that we kind of acknowledge that those are things that people need in order to kind of feel comfortable. And I think often when I'm working with people, it's looking at that space where they go from what feels easy, what feels challenging, and trying to kind of acknowledge where someone might be masking or just kind of carrying too much bandwidth that they don't necessarily have the same capacity for, that they might have done 10, 15 years prior. Okay, so in terms of the kind of neurodiversity space, the way that your brain is formed when you're born, that's where we kind of look at the applied and clinical neurodiversity. So that's kind of all the stuff that you're kind of pre-wired with, if you like. So that's your pre-existing neurotype. And these are kind of, these are conditions that will be from birth and have a persistent and consistent kind of impact on your processing. And in terms of kind of like, that's where your kind of like, if you think of it as kind of the hose pipe where everything flows through in terms of your processing. The acquired neurodiversities are conditions that happen to your brain and your system after birth. And this is where we look at the two different types. So the acquired neurodiversities that are transient may be cyclical, they may pass in and out of a kind of processing, to things like depression, anxiety, kind of mental health conditions, COVID-19, perimenopause. Menopause is a massive acquired neurodiversity. So it's like someone stepping on that hose pipe. So even if you're not neurodiverse to start with, your pre-existing kind of processing is being impacted by this acquired pull on your resources, if you like. So we have a mix of physical, intellectual, and emotional resources at any one time. And if something's pulling more than the others, then it'll have a knock-on effect. So that's where you can see when the acquired chronic ones will kind of have a significant impact on kind of physical processing. All the things that sit within the kind of chronic fatigue or brain injuries or strokes sit within the acquired, because they're a consistent pull on physical processing. So we're looking at the acquired neurodiversities in terms of the transient stuff. And I think what's really interesting is this kind of statistic around women who are going through a late diagnosis for ADHD, who are also hitting the perimenopause. I think it's around about 83% who are going through that late diagnosis. My personal theory is that as an ADHD or someone who's clinically neurodiverse, the criteria, the diagnostic criteria for the clinical neurodiversities have often been very white male biased. And so a lot of female presenting women, much more socially compliant, all kind of conditioned to become more socially compliant, they'll mask higher, it'll be much more internalized. And the bandwidth that they use to manage the traits of the ADHD suddenly gets swept away when they hit perimenopause. And also estrogen is a massive kind of hormone that kind of manages three major neurotransmitters that impact your kind of emotional regulation, executive function, and also kind of sort of mood regulation as well. So it's incredibly, it's like a tipping point where it becomes a bit of a double whammy. So if you're already ADHD but didn't realize you're ADHD, and then perimenopause comes along, that's where you'll see it having a double impact. And that's really where you're looking at someone stepping on that hose pipe quite hard. So that's where it's quite interesting to kind of tease apart kind of what's going on. Some people, it's just the perimenopause, menopause, and it's not ADHD. Some people, they'll really see a kind of a doubling down of the impact of kind of where that's starting to kind of hit for them. Okay. So technically, perimenopause is the time leading up to the cessation of your periods. Now, the kind of like the idea of this, your periods stopping for a year and then you go into menopause or postmenopause is kind of quite arbitrary, because kind of lots of women, there's about 30% of women who have irregular periods anyway from kind of day dot. And also kind of some women can have regular periods. They may be kind of much heavier, much lighter, up to the point where actually they are deemed menopausal, depending on kind of where the hormones are. I think it's really important to acknowledge that although the median age for menopause is 52, so if you track back 4 to 10 years in terms of kind of when you start perimenopause, which is the decline of your kind of estrogen levels in line with the decline in your egg supply, for Black women and women from kind of Latin American countries, they can kind of start even younger. So kind of the impact of kind of those hormones shifting can happen even earlier for those. Now, if we're looking kind of technically kind of what's happening, we're born with all these millions of eggs in our ovaries. The pituitary gland, when we hit puberty, kind of shoots out a message to the ovaries, goes, shoot out an egg, and the ovaries go ba-choo, ba-choo, and they go, fine, I can do that, and I keep shooting them out for, you know, best part of 35 years. After that point, when there's fewer eggs but the pituitary gland is still demanding for those eggs to be shot out, the ovaries going, it's a bit like, I'm sorry, I thought I already scheduled that email to send, you mean I have to work even harder? And so it means that the kind of the body goes under kind of increased stress and kind of increased demand. We have estrogen receptors in every single part of our bodies. So the primary symptom that comes with that kind of increased demand for the pituitary gland is tiredness, actually, for a lot of women. There's been recent research that's just come out in the last week or so as well, showing the network of the kind of fight, flight, or freeze nerves, the kind of like nervous system that kind of surrounds the ovaries as well, actually increases as we get older as well. So that everything that in terms of kind of like, it's not just a decreasing supply of eggs, it's this whole systemic change of kind of what's happening to the ovary system. Those that kind of sort of go into kind of menopause, or they can be kind of suddenly kind of put into menopause that's not kind of the natural decline, you can be triggered by kind of medical menopause, which will be when someone has a hysterectomy and has their ovaries removed as well. I've just had a hysterectomy, but I had my ovaries left intact, but I'm still kind of noticing the impact, even having been on HRT. So it's one of the things of education around women who are having hysterectomies or having kind of interventional surgery, particularly for endometriosis or fibroids. Actually, it's quite significant surgery that we need to allow women to kind of recover from properly, rather than expecting them to kind of get back into work within a couple of weeks. It's significant, you know, hysterectomies, you're removing an entire organ system. You can also kind of experience perimenopause, menopausal symptoms, even if you're postmenopausal, if you're taking estrogen blocking hormone treatments. And I am going to talk about kind of hormones a little bit more sort of a bit later on as well. So kind of those fluctuations of kind of hormones can be quite significant, particularly with the medical hysterectomies, because that can be like dropping off a cliff for some people. I think it's also important to acknowledge the trans and non-binary sort of members of society. If you're born with ovaries, you will go through menopause and perimenopause. And actually, kind of the emotional side of having to kind of take HRT, especially if you've gone through transition, or even if you're kind of that kind of conversation, I suppose, around kind of estrogen or something that is might be seen as a feminizing kind of hormone. Just want to kind of reassure the HRT or the MRT, the menopause replacement therapy, which is slightly different. acts very differently, or and is actually a microdose in comparison to, say, if you're taking kind of birth control. So sort of the level at which the kind of HRT and MLT kind of work is kind of very different to what we would normally have throughout the highest levels of estrogen. So it's important for people to be supported, not just kind of in terms of medical support, but also in terms of kind of the emotional support around that stuff as well. Okay, so why does it have such an impact? So this lovely diagram you hear on the right, this is kind of our regular cycle for those that have regular cycles. And then when we hit perimenopause, it's known as a zone of chaos. And this is one of the reasons why you won't get consistent symptoms, you won't get consistent impact from perimenopause. Things will fluctuate, things won't always feel the same. So my personal journey has started perimenopause when I was 42. It wasn't until I was 47 when I was literally scraping the brow, in so much pain, so much fatigue, that I went, I cannot go on like this. And it wasn't until that point that I finally kind of went to the doctor and said, I need some support. I need to kind of do something because this isn't working for me. One of the reasons I didn't go earlier was because I felt that I wasn't, in inverted commas, bad enough, that I didn't meet the criteria for what was seen as being perimenopause. So the NICE guidelines are that there are only 4 symptoms that are kind of connected to perimenopause: irregular periods, hot flashes, insomnia, and mood disruption. I didn't get any kind of like sort of hot flashes in particular, and so kind of like the collection of symptoms that I had didn't really match what was supposed to be kind of like considered me being in perimenopause, but I clearly was, because going on HRT was transformative. So the key kind of neurotransmitters that we have are dopamine. So that's kind of around kind of executive function. So obviously the lessening of that will kind of give you brain fog. Acetylcholine, which is linked to memory function. And what was done in a study around kind of the cycles of estrogen dropping in the brain, even on a regular kind of cycle, was that the hippocampus, which is the seat of the long-term memory, physically shrinks. You haven't lost your brain, you haven't lost the knowledge, so don't panic, but the kind of the access to that information, it's like from your short-term memory and your working memory, it's like the bridge has been pulled back. And so that when you go to retrieve something from your long-term memory, it's like there's a gap there. And that's why it feels like you're kind of missing part of your memory, missing part of your brain. Of course, that is incredibly unsettling, and anxiety is a massive part of knowing that I can do my job in the workplace if I feel as though the last time I went to do something, that bit was missing from my brain, or I've lost names, or I don't know how to kind of process that thing that I've been staring at for 15 minutes. Okay, so there's a very real, tangible impact to the estrogen dropping. And of course, serotonin, which is kind of to do with mood regulation. And, that's where a lot of people won't understand why am I crying all the time? Why do I feel incredibly anxious? I call it the anxiety of doom. It kind of like settles on you as though the world's coming to an end, and it comes from nowhere, right? And it's all to do with this hormone fluctuation. Okay. As you can see, postmenopause, then you'll kind of have a slight kind of differing kind of flat line. It won't be fluctuating, but it will still need balancing, and it will still need support. Okay, so some of the things that can kind of impact people in terms of kind of symptoms, and they won't all be kind of present all the time, they will fluctuate. So brain fog, low mood, sort of insomnia. I probably had insomnia consistently for about 5 years. Frozen shoulder, kind of aching, sort of particularly in the hips, joints, feet, lordy, really painful. Extreme fatigue that kind of like just doesn't seem to sort itself out, needing to have kind of feeling as though you need to have naps in the afternoon. Hello, flexible working. Body dysregulation, of course, kind of that, when your kind of body is changing temperature and you don't feel as though you can control it, then that's incredibly distracting, and it can be really distressing, particularly if someone is experiencing extreme hot flashes in the workplace and they feel as though they're kind of, it's very noticeable. So kind of working from home is a really good kind of reasonable adjustment for people, so that they don't feel as though they have to be kind of performative and on to mask what's going on for them all the time. Allergies, kind of like hay fever can increase. and obviously kind of like a drop in emotional resilience. So in terms of, think about kind of when we reach a certain point in our lives, when menopause hits, quite often a lot of people are caregivers, they're parents, they're partners, they're managing. They may have also kind of got to a certain senior level within the workplace. They're probably the person that everyone is going to ask questions of because they have experience. And so you're juggling all these plates and have less bandwidth anyway because of all the hormones kind of being on the fritz. And suddenly it feels like you have just less kind of bandwidth and patience for everyone else's stuff. And a lot of the work that I do with women in the initial kind of session is really about figuring out how much are you giving to other people? How much capacity have you got for yourself? It's not just about self-care. It's about really understanding the mechanisms that you need to support what is fundamentally a very different system, both kind of in terms of your cognitive processing and your physical processing. Okay, so it's really important. And I think, the other thing is that the classic thing that if you go to the kind of GPs, is that if you're saying that you're kind of having emotional dysregulation and you can't stop crying, is they'll sling you on kind of antidepressants. It's not an antidepressant problem. It's a hormone thing that needs to be fixed. Okay. I think the other thing that's also kind of not necessarily spoken about a lot of is around kind of UTIs and the urinary genital stuff. When estrogen levels drop significantly, kind of passages between the kind of like the bladder, the vagina, and the kind of like the bowel thin significantly. And if you're not supporting your system with enough estrogen to kind of support that area, then actually you can get a lot of kind of problems. I had a client cancelled just at the weekend because she was literally wiped out for 3 days by a horrific UTI. And it turns out that she's had her coil removed only 4 months ago. So she's not receiving the same hormone level and she's perimenopausal. So the kind of not being, if you don't understand that all of these things can add up to kind of not feeling great, and you're only kind of going off kind of like a list of 4 symptoms, then you'll probably be kind of like masking, kind of managing quite a lot of stuff. Okay, so understanding that all of these things can be impacted because, like I say, we have estrogen receptors in every part of our systems. These things can all be issues. Okay. All right. So things that can be impacted. So working memory or ability to pay attention or be kind of place your attention on a particular task. Things kind of disappearing from your brain, feeling as though you can't manage reactive work. A lot of the strategies I work on with women is really about understanding the time of the day when their brain's at its freshest and being able to chunk down tasks and ring fence that time so they're not being consistently disrupted, because the difference between thinking you're not going to be disturbed to being disturbed or thinking you might be disturbed by Teams messages or kind of someone just popping you an email or just yapping in your ear makes all the difference to your ability to then focus, right? So kind of like I said earlier about memory dropout, that can feel like I should be able to remember these things. I should be able to know what I'm doing next. You might just need extra tools, and that's okay. It's not a failing. It's just that you need a different tool for this point in your life. If your kind of hormones are shifting rapidly or cycling rapidly, and then you have to kind of sort of you have exhaustion, you don't sleep well, so it's like poor sleep has a massive impact on your processing speed, which is your brain's ability to do a task in the moment. If you're having poor sleep consistently, then your kind of processing speed is going to be slower. So it means it's going to be harder to get through tasks that might have felt much easier when you were rested. Again, talking about emotional bandwidth and resilience, how much capacity have you got to deal with other people's stuff? Physical discomfort, obviously, kind of being in the workplace. And if you're someone who's masking, i.e., kind of internalizing or not really sharing or not having the language to know how to share what's going on for you, then that can really kind of play into a narrative of like, well, must be me. I'm the one that's the problem. I need to be fixed. And this is what we call internalized ableism. And it's not. It's just, this is why we kind of having these conversations are important, so that we can normalize this, and women don't feel as though, or kind of individuals don't feel as though that they're having to hide all of this stuff. Okay, so I'm going to preface this a little bit by saying I know not everybody will be a massive fan of HRT and hormones. What I want to do is present the facts of kind of the evidence of kind of research. You'll make your own mind up, but I want to kind of just reassure people that it is an option. It's a safe option to go on HRT and MRT. And the reasons why, the narrative that's out there that it's not safe and that it's a cancer risk and all the rest of it. Okay. Some people, you know, even if there's a family kind of history of breast cancer, it doesn't mean to say that that's your physiology. We also have very different hormones to the time when the kind of narrative about kind of HRT being dangerous was out there, in terms that we don't use synthetic hormones in the same way. We have different delivery systems. You can have systemic, which is a pill. You can have localized, which is often to do with kind of having vaginal estrogen. So it's kind of directly to the source, if you like, without it being systemic. And there's transdermal. And transdermal and localized estrogen have far lower risks on all factors. So there will be an option in terms of kind of what goes, you know, so you can kind of like explore. And usually HRT, so hormone replacement therapy, MRT, which is menopause replacement therapy, the difference there is that HRT will usually be sequential, i.e. will take a break from the from the hormones so that you can have a period up until the point it would become menopausal, and then it will be consistent. Okay, so you won't stop taking progesterone, you won't stop taking the estrogen. The protocol that can be put in place is a PET one, so progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone as well. Okay, so there's lots of kind of things to explore in terms of that, and I think it's really important to just recognise why the narrative is out there that kind of HRT is dangerous. So from the 60s up to 2002, HRT was seen as a safe option to support women and to support those going through perimenopause and menopause. The Women's Health Initiative came out with a study saying that Premarin, which was a synthetic hormone, increased breast cancer fit risk by a factor of 1.24. And so anything over 1 is considered to be an increased risk. Now, there was a doctor called Dr. Avram Blooming, and he decided to do a study to kind of look at other factors that also have kind of cancer risk, just to put that number into perspective. And the reason it was important is that, as you can see from this slide on the picture on the left, Heidi Schneider did this fantastic kind of study. The drop-off of HRT use was massive. It was kind of almost instantaneous. And if you think about kind of birth control and HRT is a microdose of birth control. They behave differently, but there's about, so in terms of inflammatory kind of sort of factor, HRT is actually 300 times less than birth control. So if your GPs ever can prescribe you birth control but won't prescribe you HRT, then they're not getting the right information. As HRT dropped off, antidepressant use scaled up, kind of mood stabilizers and sleep meds also rocketed. So it kind of, you would think with the drop off of HRT that cancer rates would go down. In fact, they didn't. And the study that was released was actually based off about a 2-month period done on women who were significantly postmenopausal, who also had kind of a lot of predisposing kind of health conditions. So the study wasn't really accurate in the first place, but the damage was done. So let's look at some other factors that have an increased kind of risk of breast cancer. Alcohol, 1.26. Working the night shift, 1.51. Use of antibiotics for 1,000 days plus in your lifetime, 2.7. Now we get into kind of slightly weird, this sort of ridiculous kind of realm. The use of an electric blanket, 4.9. The biggest and most significant kind of signifier is smoking and lung cancer. Will give you a factor, an increased risk factor of 26. I think it's really important to say that hormones do not cause, particularly estrogen, does not cause breast cancer for the majority of people. And I think it's really important to say that. You know, if you're ever pregnant, your estrogen levels are actually 10 times higher than at any other time in your life. So it doesn't even kind of make logical sense to say that hormones, remember the HRT is a microdose in comparison to other times in our life, causes breast cancer. So I'm saying this just so you can go and get the right information. Okay. So what are the protective qualities around HRT? And I think it's really important just to recognize on the right here just how much women have been gaslit around kind of their own experience and told to just suck it up and get on with it, and have just not been able to manage. So in terms of kind of like, particularly this demographic here, you know, it's really shocking that from the period where HRT was deemed to be dangerous, that those kind of women who have taken lost their lives to suicide has skyrocketed. So let's look at the protective qualities of HRT. Cardiovascular health, massive in terms of kind of like protective quality. Macular degeneration, where you kind of lose that periphery vision, to like 50% kind of benefit. Again, diabetes, visceral fat, bone density, cognitive, I think sort of like shown as kind of, you know, the kind of like the earlier that you start with kind of HRT before menopause is massive in terms of staving off kind of Alzheimer's and cognitive decline. Now, here's the biggest one. If you're not on hormones, or you don't take any sort of hormones, and by the time you get to the age of 80, 84, there is a 1 in 2 chance of you suffering an osteoporotic fracture. The mortality rate from an osteoporotic fracture is about 30% in the next 12 months. So even as a protective quality, and the reason is that we have, you know, progesterone receptors and estrogen receptors in our bones. There's a massive thinning off of bone density as we lose our kind of estrogen. So we become more frail physically, and kind of, so HRT in combination with weight-bearing exercise and kind of resistance to exercise is definitely proven to improve bone density and bone health. And that's why it's kind of seen as a really useful protective quality. Of course, we've spoken about the UTI side of things. Collagen and skin health. Obviously, you know, there's a massive booming industry around kind of the menopause sort of at the moment. One of the things that kind of, you know, you can look to is all these face creams that kind of produce help you kind of put hyaluronic acid back into your skin. Estrogen helps us produce it naturally. Okay. And I think this is the biggest thing. Just in the last 2 days, there has been a study released over in the US where they examined the medical records of over 1 million women. So it's not an insignificant study. And what they saw was that those that started HRT and estrogen during menopause had a 60% decreased risk of heart disease, breast cancer, and stroke compared to those that had none. Okay. So getting off my soapbox, please educate yourself. Please go out there and kind of make sure that you have the right information for you. If you're on a protocol that's not working for you and you still don't feel great, go back, demand more. Okay. So she steps off her soapbox. How does an inclusive culture fit into your organization? I think it's really important, as with all neurodiverse conditions and support in the workplace, you do not need to have a formal diagnosis. And we look at how you support the traits and the impact of the traits, what's happening for you here and now, and what tools do you need, whether that's assistive tech, whether it's about coaching, so you understand more about how to support yourself, or is it about kind of technology? Okay. I think it's really important to acknowledge that there is a duty of care to support women and to support individuals who are going through hormonal life changes in order for them to be at their best and to continue bringing their best to the workplace. There is a considerable loss of women from the workplace. I was talking to someone yesterday where they were saying that there's a significant concern about the loss of female leadership because so many are leaving what are seen as kind of reactive, high pressure spaces because they're not able to kind of change the way that they need to work in order to still be productive, and they just feel that they have to leave the job anyway. All these reasonable adjustments are covered under the kind of 2010 Equality Act. And so, like I said, the definition of kind of being able to get that support is not through formal diagnosis. It's whether something's having a day-to-day impact for 12 months or more. Last November, there was a massive survey done by the government, and the Menopause Act was drawn up. Next year, it will become, will go into law, and every workplace will have to have a menopause policy in place. So again, with all of kind of the reasonable adjustments and kind of support policies that I kind of work with companies around, I say, don't think of it as kind of having to have an individualized program for individual people. How can you step back and make this process more inclusive for everyone? And especially about kind of being able to kind of make it accessible. And I don't mean in terms of a process, I mean accessible for an individual to go and find it for themselves if they don't feel comfortable having those conversations with line managers or peers. I think that's really, really key, because actually one of the biggest things is being able to feel as though you've got some control over a process for yourself when your system's in flux and you don't feel as though you've got any sort of consistency around what's happening to you. So having access, being able to kind of signpost stuff so people can find it for themselves, I think is really important. Sometimes it's the simple things that work, you know, flexibility around working from home, kind of, you know, asking what works well for you, not saying you should be doing it this way, or we have a kind of an HR requirement for you to be in the office, kind of like, you know, sort of 80% of the time. If that doesn't work for someone, then what would work? Focus on the strengths. What can that person bring to the workplace in terms of their contribution and their value, rather than focusing on what might be perceived as flaws or weaknesses, because that's only going to other someone, that's only going to make them feel much worse about the situation. We don't need to be fixed, we just need to be supported. And I think it's really important to recognize that perimenopausal and menopausal women are the single largest growing demographic of women within society at this time. And there's over 900,000 people, nearly 1 million women leaving the workplace because they don't feel as though they can have the support. And I just want to kind of track that across to kind of the medical profession as well. The BMA did a study of about 3,000 female GPs going through perimenopause a few years back, and they found that only 16% felt comfortable enough to ask for reasonable adjustments, because the rest of them felt as though that would be laughed at or dismissed out of hand. So, and then a vast majority of them are leaving because they can't change the way that they need to work. So if we're leaving the very demographic of individuals who understand what we're going through from the medical profession, then that becomes increasingly difficult for us to be able to self-advocate. So that's why better education across the board is really, really necessary. I think it's important to kind of have conversations that feel psychologically safe. I think it's important that it's not embarrassing, or I don't know what to say, or kind of make it transactional. What are the facts? What are you struggling with? What are the challenges? What tools do you need in place? It's inherently quite emotional. It's an emotional kind of process to go through this kind of change of what's going on with you. But actually, if you can make those conversations feel as though they're a solutions-based process rather than ones that are an automatic step to the exit door, which is where a lot of women will feel massively concerned about kind of going through a workplace needs assessment. I think it's really important to kind of be able to support people and reinforce that they're going to have conversations that feel safe and they're not going to be judged. Okay. And again, these things might take time, so they may need more flexibility. There's the access to work process, also kind of like that menopause support fits within that. We'll talk a little bit later sort of in terms of kind of what Posturite can offer in terms of the kind of the coaching space. But be mindful that this is something that's very personal. So try and make it not heartless, but transactional, so it doesn't become an emotional kind of minefield for someone. In terms of kind of support in the workplace, I think it's really important to kind of make sure that you're getting the right research. There's some individuals who I really recommend who are kind of just consistently pulling out kind of the research, the kind of current papers. Dr. Mary Claire Haver, she's in the US, Dr. Louise Newson in the UK, Kelly Casperson's also very good. Her podcast, You Are Not Broken, is excellent. She talks a lot about kind of the current papers around kind of like hormone health. I think it's really important to kind of have the right information, so kind of not to just kind of, you know, just go TikTok kind of like videos and kind of, you know, sort of 5 seconds of it in Instagram. Do the reading, kind of like, you know, we have kind of 30, 40 years of experiencing kind of these kind of fluctuations. They can be your best, most productive times if you kind of have the tools that you need. I think being able to kind of support people and feel as though it's an investment in them progressing is really important, rather than it being, oh, we need to fix you because you're going through this thing. It's not kind of an individual's fault. It's kind of what they're experiencing, and it's a very natural progression, but the impact is tangible. I would say that with the individuals that I've coached over specifically over the last 6 years, since I started specializing in this, the difference it can make just in being heard and not being judged and being given really simple techniques, knowing how to put down boundaries around your time, around your effort, and kind of being really clear about kind of what works well for you. This means that I can do X, Y, and Z, is transformative. Women go on massive journeys through their lives anyway, but having the tools to support themselves and not feel as though they have to wait for support is really huge. In terms of kind of, sort of some of the policies that kind of put in place, or kind of some of the support that's in place, I think being able to have access to kind of, sort of employing support systems and kind of private healthcare, getting support, not having to wait weeks and weeks and weeks for kind of menopause specialists or kind of like GP appointments. Just knowing that there's support out there and being able to access it, I think is incredibly useful. I think even sort of being able to carve out new roles for women so that they don't necessarily have to do, all the hours that they used to do, so that they can deliver quality and not quantity, I think is also a useful policy to kind of have in place. Right, that's my part. I'm now going to stop sharing and pass it back over to Andy.
Thank you, Emma. My unmute button wasn't working then. Thank you very much, Emma. That was brilliant. A lot of information in there, and probably a lot of people that will rewatch that last sort of 35 minutes with the sheer amount of information. A lot of people are absolutely relating to a lot of words that you're saying in the chat. I think there's a lot of really interesting individual conversations happening as well. Which is educating myself as well, which is great. I think one of the things that have come out of there is almost the sort of the lottery of a knowledge of a GP. When individuals are going seeing their GP, that it's quite a mixed reaction in terms of what they can get. So that's quite interesting and educational for myself as well. We did get quite a few questions prior to today that were sent in when people did sign up for today. So I've got a couple for yourself now, Emma, if that's okay. Before I let you get yourself a glass of water and have a minute. This is probably from a gender point of view, and something that does come up quite a lot when, particularly myself, and I'll speak about this subject to a lot of our clients, is how do we educate everyone on menopause and not just the women?
I think it's really important to acknowledge that even though, obviously menopause and perimenopause is happening to kind of individuals, women, it has a wider impact, because obviously often those individuals are at the center of families, and so partners and families will be impacted. But a lot of the time, women will feel as though they're having to kind of hold all that stuff because they're expected to. And that's why I think it's really important to kind of give information, so that it's not about, quite often I can have individuals sort of talking about how their partners kind of don't understand, or they're impatient. And quite a lot of the time it's because they just don't have the information. If they understood kind of the impact, the amount of work, the amount of effort that goes to kind of holding things together when you're going through this process, hopefully you would hope for a little bit more support and compassion. I know that the government is starting to think about a more widespread program of education, and I think sort of we're the first generation of women who've kind of got to this point and gone, I'm sorry, what fresh hell is this? Nobody warned us, right? So we have no language, we had no kind of dialogue about it, because it was just expected that you kind of like put up and kind of shut up, basically. So I think being able to kind of listen to the experiences of women now who are successfully navigating this space, and using that as a means to be able to educate those that are coming up, sort of who are younger coming through. I think younger women, there's only about 30% of women who will have no impact from the perimenopause whatsoever. So there's a vast majority of people who will be impacted, right? Better education for kind of the medical profession, I think generally is really important. I had pretty much a stand-up row with a pharmacist the other day who once she had heard that I'd had a hysterectomy, was like, oh, well, you don't need progesterone anymore. You don't have a uterus. And I said, well, I still have bones and I still have a cardiovascular system. You will be prizing that progesterone out of my cold, dead grip. So it's like, if I hadn't known that that was the case, I would have gone, oh, okay, yeah, fine. And that would have been doing a massive disservice to myself. So that's why I kind of say, go and do your own research and find the papers, kind of like go with a clutch of kind of like, published papers and kind of wave them in kind of people's faces if you need to, because actually we need to be our own best self advocates until there's a more consistent kind of knowledge societally.
Fantastic. Another question, and it's in three parts, so I'll just read it all out if that's okay. Why is it important to have these conversations? What is the ultimate aim of having these conversations for both people and business? And why is it a worthwhile investment?
I think ultimately what you want to aim for is, it's not just about keeping women in the workplace. It's about um, years and years of professional experience. We're talking about the bottom line. If you've got kind of all this lived experience, but also professional experience, and you're wasting it as a resource because you're not giving adequate support or pathways to support, I think that's a bad business decision, frankly. If you're willing to just dismiss a kind of a whole clutch of society or a whole section of your workforce just because they need additional support, then I think that's a fairly poor decision. This stuff doesn't need to feel difficult. It doesn't need to feel like it's a huge amount of time and money. It's a worthwhile investment in the quality of kind of performer that you have. And actually, it doesn't take a huge amount often to turn stuff around very quickly for individuals.
Fantastic. And lastly, before I let you have a few minutes break, what does an inclusive work environment look and feel like? How will you know that you've created a positive space for women at work?
I think this is a question that people should, a series of questions that people should ask themselves, right? So if you were to think about an inclusive workspace in the future and say kind of 18 months from now, and it was successful, what will you be seeing and hearing in terms of, what are the conversations that you're having with people around their support needs? Do you see kind of a higher retention of women working comfortably, performing well? That the access to those tools is visible, that it's normalized, that there isn't embarrassment or kind of like, oh, we better not talk about that stuff. No, not dismissing women, not gaslighting their experience by saying, oh, it's just kind of, sort of a change in life kind of thing. I think it's really important to meet people where they are, but think about what you want to see and hear as a kind of a positive outcome. Like, what would the benefits be? And so kind of thinking about that will allow you to strive towards a successful inclusive workspace.
Fantastic. Again, thank you very much, Emma. You will be back shortly. There's a few questions that are coming in via the attendees today, but I'm going to pause for a moment with yourself, let you have a little rest. I'm going to turn to our enablement account manager, David Mitchell. Many of you will already know Dave. He brings over 20 years of experience supporting organizations in building neurodiversity awareness, implementing effective workplace adjustment programs, and introducing assistive technology solutions. Dave will be discussing how we are supporting many organizations with this very subject. Morning, Dave. I'll hand over to yourself.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks very much, Emma. That was brilliant, really insightful. Okay, so next slide, please. So yeah, basically, we just wanted to run through a few of these services we can help you with, guys. We've been delivering these already. I mean, Emma's been quite busy, obviously, menopause awareness. But yeah, we basically deliver this all year long. So we can actually support individuals who are not sure on what they need in the workplace for that kind of support. We can do and deliver a workplace needs assessment. And what that basically means is you will have a designated assessor with experience of the different symptoms that you might be going through or may go through in the future. And they'll sit down and discuss your workplace challenges that you're having. So where you're having different kind of challenges, and they'll discuss ways that they can recommend support for that. And where your employer can actually put in the reasonable adjustments that Emma has recently been speaking about. And that can be anything from supporting your short-term memory challenges with assistive software. It could be one-to-one coaching, which is probably the most recommended, where you'll get somebody like Emma coming along and supporting you with your day-to-day challenges, doing your workplace duties. And then other recommendations on the back of that as well. So you get quite a detailed report at the end of the session. It takes around 60 minutes to deliver the assessments. And our kind of lead times to get them in place is around 10 working days for remote. Generally, that's much quicker than the access to work, which is another route where you can get a workplace needs assessment. The access to work is getting up to 6 months, if not longer now. So if you need that support much quicker, Posturite can deliver that. Next slide, please. So one of the other things is our awareness training that we offer on menopause. Like I said, Emma's already been delivering some of these for us. And this is dedicated to your company. So we will look at, obviously, your business and come and deliver the awareness for everybody. Like we say, the males need to know as much as females what you're going through and the different challenges. And a lot of the information that Emma's just gone through will be included. But yeah, it's getting everybody aware on how we can support individuals, because not everybody can attend these sessions. Next slide, please. And then the one-to-one strategy coaching. So this is where a dedicated coach comes to you and sits down and discusses the different challenges you're having. Like I said, that can be anything from supporting those short-term memory challenges with assistive technology. It could be different strategies to help you with day-to-day challenges, how to prep for meetings, how to be prepared within them, how to deal with post-meeting information. And then in addition to that, any kind of anxiety or stress that you might be going through as well, different strategies to support that. Looking at your current symptoms as well, but also what you may go through in the future. There's many different symptoms. My wife's currently going through some of these, and yeah, there's just an unbelievable amount of different symptoms that you could be going through. So the different strategies will really help you cope with those challenges. Looking at your different working patterns, like Emma said, maybe sometimes a different working job role might be more suitable. But they really do help with the different coaching sessions that we deliver. We deliver them on a one-to-one basis, and they're delivered with a gap between them, so you've got time to implement those strategies. Very similar to our neurodiverse strategies. You're given time to implement them, get them embedded, and then review them on the next session. And then we just charge you for each session as we go along. If you've had enough of them, you can stop, or if you need more, you can put a request in to ask for more sessions as you go along. Next slide, please, Tom. And then stress assessment. So this has been a new service we've implemented, guys. What we found is a lot of our clients are saying the biggest cause of absenteeism or people going on burnout is down to stress. And that can be from the different working role, but obviously, if you've got a different condition that might be causing those stresses and anxieties, we perform an assessment on an individual to basically look at the challenges they're having, why they're having the stress and anxiety, and then basically implement recommendations for support for those individuals. So this can often be where this has occurred because you're actually masking the symptoms, like Emma said, and it's really too much. Your body's had enough, your brain's going in meltdown, and you just can't take any more. So we deliver the assessment to basically implement those recommendations and support to help individuals in the workplace.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dave. That's great. If people do want more information on what they've just been talking around, then again, just do get in touch, enablement at posturite.co.uk. Emma, David, thanks for coming back to us. We did have, as I mentioned, a few questions that were sent in prior to today. This is probably a question for yourself, Emma, if that's okay. Have you seen perimenopause/menopause affect or exacerbate desk-based musculoskeletal issues such as back pain and RSI?
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that kind of often isn't really acknowledged, because quite a lot of people are used to normalizing a certain amount of kind of physical pain when they're sitting at desks all day in, day out. But I think it's kind of really interesting, even with my neighbor who had kind of come off her kind of more kind of functional dose of estrogen and then had frozen shoulder, and the moment she went back on estrogen, it disappeared. You know, these kind of musculoskeletal things are really, really common for, I mean, I've got a recurrence of bursitis in my hip at the moment, which is incredibly painful. You know, these things come and go, but it is all to do with kind of, you know, about joining the dots. I don't think kind of people join the dots often. And I was looking through kind of the chat, and one of the points that came up was about cholesterol and BP. Actually, cholesterol and BP spikes, blood pressure spikes, are being seen as one of the most more reliable indicators. So even if an individual has not changed their diet or their exercise, and suddenly they get a spike in BP and cholesterol levels for no apparent reason, that's often an indicator of where the estrogen is really starting to kind of go into the kind of the drop zone. So kind of, again, it's about kind of paying attention to the evidence, isn't it? Rather than saying, oh, you just need to kind of eat better. These things are very real. They're kind of very tangible, you know, cortisol levels kind of spiking as well. So, you know, there are other things that you can't get a tangible kind of test, but you can definitely look for markers like physical musculoskeletal things, and kind of, you know, things like blood pressure and kind of cholesterol levels. So yeah, kind of definitely kind of those are kind of clear indicators of things happening in your system.
There was a few comments actually early on in the presentation around frozen shoulder, and there was quite a few people that said they had a frozen shoulder, and then there was a comment to say I had no idea this would be related. So that's really interesting and again insightful for people to actually link those two together.
I mean, it's also to do with kind of the collagen that we lose. Like we lose a vast majority. I think sort of also bone density. We lose, I think it's something like 10% of collagen every year postmenopausal, and then the majority, I think it's about 30% of bone density, happens in the 2 years prior to your period stopping. So we have a kind of a sort of osteoblast and osteoclast, and one kind of produces kind of bone and one kind of chips away at bone. And as the estrogen drops, and progesterone's a massive one in terms of your kind of bone density, we don't produce bone in the same way. And that's why weight resistance and weight bearing, putting your muscles under strain, therefore putting your bones under strain, helps the bone regrow kind of bone density. And that's why it's important to kind of, you know, it's not just hormones, it's also about kind of how you're supporting your body to keep doing the things that it's intended to do.
Fantastic, thank you. Another question prior to today: what's your 3 things you'd insist, this is putting you on the spot, so what's your 3 things you'd insist companies introduce today to truly support women in their workplace?
I think I said it earlier on, having a system that women can access on their own, that is incredibly clear, that is a clear process that they can access on their own, that doesn't feel like it's an automatic walk to the exit door, right? So workplace needs assessments or going to Rocky Health. I mean, I had one client who told me that as part of her internal kind of occupational health assessment, they did a health and safety risk assessment on her, like she was going to be a danger to the business. I mean, I think that's unconscionable, right? How to make someone feel really terrible about themselves. So kind of being mindful of the language that's being used. Don't kind of regard kind of individuals, and really pay attention to the strengths of what someone brings. So if you did a kind of like almost like a kind of an assessment of where someone's at, what skill set they have, where in business can they be deployed, right? That would be a useful way of kind of approaching it. Having clear systems that are there, and educating, you know, managers and kind of, you know, individuals who are supporting others to have a language that they feel comfortable about. Those are the kind of 3 things I think would be really useful.
There's quite a few comments around an individual journey of when that starts. So this question does relate to this. I would like to have a specific list of perimenopause symptoms. Despite my internet research, I am not sure what to believe.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm kind of saying, you know, go to medical practitioners who are actually referencing studies. I mean, sort of the amount of kind of medical research in women's health is pretty poor anyway. You know, if you think about the majority of medicines that are out there at the moment, women weren't included in medical studies until I think something like 1989. So there's a vast majority of medicines that are not even titrated for kind of female physiology. But at least with the kind of growing movement around, you know, understanding that this is an area of medicine that really needs to kind of have research and kind of knowledge, proper knowledge out there, then kind of, you know, read the books, read the books from people who are kind of like studying it day in, day out. I think that's really, really important. You know, I think it's just it's important to kind of make sure that you've got tangible evidence that means that you can stand in front of someone who might be telling you something different. I mean, an example, my kind of recently when I was having surgery, I was told by my surgical team to stop taking my HRT 2 weeks before the operation because of clot risk. They didn't ask me what type of estrogen I was taking. I'm on transdermal, so it has a minimal risk. And I also said, if I stop my HRT, you'll have a crazy lady in theatre. It's like, let's be really clear. The benefits to me and the damage to me not being on that HRT, and possibly you, is quite significant. So don't be advising me. I'll sign any disclaimer you want, right? But don't be telling me I have to stop the hormones that are making me feel like myself and kind of feel kind of like I'm managing, you know.
Amazing. There's quite a few few questions regarding Emma doing actual sessions for the organisations that you're all tuning into. The answer is absolutely yes. So do get in touch with us if you do want Emma to speak at your organisation. We do a lot of menopause awareness sessions, Emma, don't we? And yeah, it's great to put those in place. So again, do reach out to us, enablement at Posturite. Quite a few questions on HRT. Said I'll keep them as general as I can. But is it ever too late for a woman to start HRT in her menopause journey?
No. And also the narrative that you can only take it for 5 years, complete rubbish, right? It's a hormone imbalance. It can be balanced. And I think it could have, either, I think it was Louise Newsom who put her kind of postmenopausal mother of 65 on it at MRT and kind of like, here, let's just try and make things feel a little easier for you. There's so many different delivery systems, and I think, you know, that more and more GP is like areas are having menopause specialists kind of attached to GPs, but then the demand is massive. So, you know, I think it's anything that you can do upfront to kind of be forearmed and forewarned is really useful. But yeah, the idea that you can only be on it for 5 years is not accurate.
So on the other side of that, there is quite a few questions around stopping taking HRT. What approximate age should you consider coming off HRT? And also, how long could you stay on? Is it okay to stay on them for life for the protective effects?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, think about that kind of osteoporotic kind of, you know, statistic, you know, the bone frailty that you will get, and also, you know, the number of women who develop Alzheimer's and cognitive decline. I would say that probably a vast majority of them weren't on hormones, you know. And I'm not saying that it's for everyone, you know, and it's not just that, it's not like a magic pill either, literally. You know, you have to kind of look at lifestyle and exercise and kind of all that supportive stuff. And, you know, I do feel as though I've got kind of like a whole shelf full of stuff that I'm kind of using to support my brain being in one piece at the moment. But it's important, and I prefer feeling like this and functioning and kind of feeling like I've got everything sparking the way that I want it to, as opposed to where I was like 5 years ago, where I felt like my brain was in the bin. So, you know.
A few questions around sort of where menopause stands in terms of the Disability Act, just to maybe just sort of confirm. It was mentioned earlier on. Is menopause now covered under the Disability Act?
Yes, it is. And I think there was a lot of alarm when it was announced as that, because, you know, God knows women don't need anything else weaponizing against them in the workplace. But I think it is important. The reason why we kind of come at this from the acquired neurodiversity kind of angle, and also saying that it's under the kind of like, you know, the disability banner, is it's not the, you know, being disabled or kind of being disabled by it, but it's the fact that you then have access to support. Right. So kind of it's then about kind of like, how do we support the needs of an individual and have a duty of care to do that. The whole purpose of it, kind of the Menopause Act, and that kind of like, you know, sort of insistence that that menopause policy is in place, is really important to ensure that there is a kind of a duty of care that companies just won't see it as a box ticking exercise and will do something about it.
Fantastic. As I mentioned, there are a few ones that I just trying to keep as general as possible in terms of the medical side, but it does say, is there any evidence of thyroid dysfunction and menopause?
I would not say they are automatically connected. For my personal journey, I had my thyroid checked and it was low. The functional was low, but then it didn't sort everything. Going on levothyroxine didn't sort everything out, and I still needed to go on HRT. So I don't know if it's kind of tangibly connected, because not every woman who goes through perimenopause, or every individual goes through perimenopause and menopause, will experience kind of thyroid dysfunction. But it can definitely be the thing that kind of like goes, okay, we need to kind of, and a lot of GPs will go, let's look at your thyroid function first and then see whether you need to go on HRT, because a lot of the kind of extreme fatigue, kind of brain fog, joint pain, extreme joint pain can come from kind of hypothyroidism.
Fantastic. There's a few around assessments. There's a couple, whether it's yourself or Emma or Dave, anything to add. So I'll read them both out. The first one is, what support would access to work provide? We never go a call without access to work coming up. And also, should the workplace start doing menopause assessments, or should this come under a generic workplace assessment?
I think sort of that's part of the language normalizing it, isn't it? In terms of kind of like, what are it's in the title, isn't it? Workplace needs. So, what are the needs of the individual to help them function at their best within the workplace? I think that's kind of really important. I think sort of, I know that there is going to be an increased expectation on workplaces and companies to support not just around kind of menopause, but around all neurodiverse and kind of disability support. The access to work fund is still there, but it takes a long time. It could take up to 40 weeks from application to, sort of assessment. And I think it's really important to kind of encourage companies to start doing kind of direct support, so that people can start feeling better about kind of how they're doing it, quicker. I just also wanted to kind of like mention, I didn't mention it earlier, is that there's also quite a strong link between long COVID kind of creating or cause instigating an early menopause as well. There's been quite a lot of research done around that as well. That's something that kind of I didn't mention earlier, but it's just one of those things that kind of, it's a whole systemic thing and can kind of really impact people.
Fantastic. A few things were mentioned on the lead time regarding access to work as well, Dave. I don't know whether there's anything you want to add to that. You touched on it briefly. There was a few comments as well that the lead, obviously the lead times for assessments is quite extended at the minute, isn't it?
It is. So, yeah, we're seeing anything up to 6 months, and that's just for the assessment itself. And then following on from that, we're seeing, a massive delay in getting that support in place. So yeah, it's quite extensive, and I think if anything, it's probably going to get worse, if not better, because there's no end to it. There's more and more people coming forward for support. So yeah, it's just extending. So yeah, we're seeing a massive increase in clients coming to us directly saying we need that support quicker, which is where we can deliver a 10-day working lead time. Yeah.
10-day working lead time, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. A big one with myself and Dave present. This is a great question to ask. Are there any simple tips for male employers to offer support and partners? To offer support, I would imagine, offer support for employees and partners as well.
I would say a big one is awareness. I mean, I've even learned more today, just watching Emma talk. I mean, the frozen shoulder thing, my wife's got a frozen shoulder, so it's that awareness of what there is and how it can affect our colleagues, and being aware of that. Somebody might, be stumbling on remembering things when we're in the middle of a meeting, and having that understanding is the key thing, really, and be empathetic, really.
I mean, you've answered this question slightly, haven't you, earlier on in terms of men being part of the conversation. It's a conversation for everyone, isn't it?
If you have gaps in your understanding and what you're doing is throwing an assumption at something, then I'd say go and get some proper knowledge, right? So if you're just making an assumption about someone's behavior based off no tangible information or evidence, then I'd say you need to kind of educate yourself.
There are quite a few long questions. Again, these are probably the ones that we will come back to you directly. There is quite a few comments around reasonable adjustments, and the potential openness of reasonable adjustments, i.e., if an individual does get reasonable adjustments, is it evident to everyone within an office, which may bring unwanted attention? Do we see that happens, or that's the case, or is there a way of getting support where actually it's down to the individual how much people know about those?
I mean, you can't make someone disclose. Ultimately, that's the same for any neurodiverse condition or any medical condition. You can't force someone to disclose. The question I kind of often ask people is, get them to kind of think about, is like, is the way that you're working sustainable? Can you see yourself being like this 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years from now? And if the answer is no, then there are some variables that we can look at to change. And that's where coaching is really, really useful in that respect. And it might be kind of just some really simple systems around, organization, time management, kind of communication, managing kind of expectations. One of the tools that I often use with individuals is something called the RAG list, red, amber, green. And it's based off a process whereby, you look at, on a good day, green day, how are you feeling mentally, physically, emotionally? What's your capacity? What people might see and hear? What do you need in terms of support? And you're doing that for kind of like a best day and a worst day, and then a transitional day, which is the amber. And so instead of having to kind of try and justify yourself chapter and verse, you can just do a one-word response or kind of update to your line manager, who can then look at what I need to have happen next, which might be I need to work from home, or I need to have a chat about prioritizing my work because I've got too much brain fog. That will mean that. So, one of the things about not wanting to have to share that stuff is that you can kind of have a shorthand whereby you can get the support you need without having to feel as though you're just explaining yourself constantly, because ultimately nobody needs a pity party, right? You just want to crack on with what you're doing and feel as though you're confident and kind of valued. And kind of making that process transactional can be kind of part of that.
Great. And a lot of the coaching can be done via Teams and Zoom and things, can it, Emma? So actually from a home day where I actually feel a lot more comfortable to open up and have that conversation, then that's the setting that you're most comfortable in, that a lot of the sessions can take place in that sense. A couple more, I'm aware of time. So we are fast approaching the 11:30 mark, but I'll just get through a couple. I've read that GPs use symptoms to diagnose. I have multiple symptoms, however, I am only 40. They are using the blood tests to explore. Is there anything else people like me can do?
I think ultimately it is about thinking about your quality of life and how you're functioning. Yes, it would be deemed as kind of early, but that doesn't mean to say that you're not experiencing something. And so if you're experiencing something and you don't feel comfortable and you don't feel as though you're yourself, and there's a combination of these things, then ask to have those things looked at. And that's what I mean, like, quite often individuals will be given HRT and they'll be kind of said, right, come back in 6 weeks and we'll review. And I had one client saying that she still hadn't been seen 6 months later. That's incredibly kind of disruptive to someone waiting for someone to kind of try and fix that. So I think there needs to be kind of better support in that respect. But just if the person that you're seeing doesn't have the right information, ask to see someone else, ask to see a menopause specialist. It's about being kind of think about, how do you want to function, how do you want to feel, and if you're not near that, then keep pushing until you get the right mix of things.
Fantastic. And this is probably a similar answer in truth, but it's a question that I've want to bring into the work environment. Do you have any advice for how people address this with their managers if they have symptoms which are affecting their working lives?
It's really difficult, I think, to kind of broach those conversations because it can feel as though it's incredibly personal, and the worry and the concern is, I don't know what's going to happen if I open up this can of worms, right? So that's where chicken and egg, you need to have a process where people know what's going to happen next if they start those conversations. I think, being able to kind of go, I'm not working at my best for these reasons, and I need some support around these things, whether it's to do with flexibility around kind of getting the medical support, or whether it's to do, I need some, you know, impartial advice around how I can do these things easier and more efficiently. Ultimately, the end game is I want to be at my best self within this workspace, the way that I know I can be. So kind of that's where kind of go on the facts, the transactional stuff. What's your end point? Don't get kind of fixated. I have a kind of a saying about don't keep staring at the rock, look at the landscape. Like, where do you want to end up? Don't get bogged down with the details of how this might feel in this moment. Aim towards the end points and the end goal.
Fantastic, and I will finish on this one. Hopefully, a lot of the questions there's similar themes, so hopefully a lot of people have had their questions answered indirectly, if that makes sense. Can the emotional resilience come as emotional detachment? That with the weight gain, extreme hot flushes, and insomnia feels very much like self-loathing. Is this a normal response?
I think it's very natural, particularly when you have societal narratives about kind of women and their kind of, you know, their use in society, if they're kind of past a certain age, and that kind of, there's loads and loads of stuff around kind of that sort of narrative, and it can be kind of quite challenging. I think the other thing to kind of just mention, your cortisol levels will kind of like rocket, and so your fight, flight, and response, flight response can also look like freeze, right? And so, like, if you're kind of completely saturated and you've got no bandwidth left, it's like, oof. And I know this, again, it's not for everyone, but, you know, there's lots of kind of anecdotal and kind of like research around kind of the use of testosterone that can really kind of do masses for kind of people's energy. It's not about libido. It's about kind of, it can protect kind of, you know, lean muscle mass, bone density, and cognitive processing. So if you're feeling a level of detachment, then it also might be to do with kind of your testosterone levels and not kind of being balanced either.
Fantastic. Well, time has approached, so it will lead me to say thank you very much to Emma and to David. The feedback has been fantastic, Emma, in terms of how people have related to everything that you've mentioned, and the insight that you've gone into. So thank you very much. Thank you for everyone that has joined us. There's a lot of people that stuck with us for the whole 90 minutes, so hundreds of people. So thank you very much. Look out for our next webinar. We will be back next month with a new topic. But in the meantime, get in touch if you need us to help with anything, and we'll see you on the next webinar. Thank you very much, everyone.